So what you're saying is if I could get my hands on fecal samples of the Olympic athletes that I expect my children to be, I should not inject that into them in my kitchen at home.
Yeah,
okay,
maybe just
listeners, take that with a grain of
My
salt.
question is do you eat the shit or is it a suppository? Because I was like,
They do both.
She encapsulated it, right?
yeah,
She encapsulated it.
on the
So
show.
technically ate it.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're being serious here.
But in the clinical, it's generally via colonoscopy.
yeah, I think that
and
would
seeding.
probably have more of a draw for me.
Yeah, if you're going to go down the pathway.
Hello and welcome to the Forties Formula, your go-to place for insightful discussions on navigating your 40s and thriving in this transformative decade.
We're your hosts, Amanda and Jasmin, two women that are passionate about exploring the challenges and adventures that come with turning 40 and what lies ahead.
As a clinical nutrition coach, I spend a ton of time discussing gut health with my clients, right? And I think there's kind of a confusion and a lack of scientific discussion around the topic. Everyone kind of, throws their hat in the ring of what they heard or what they read. And that's why I am so happy to welcome to the podcast Dr. Elizabeth Biggs. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me on the podcast.
And first things first, you are a mom of 4, okay, and a medical doctor, and you've now devoted your entire life's work to helping people find wellness in a way that's distinctly different from the conventional Western medical model. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey to get there?
Okay, so my background is medicine. I did all my training in Ireland. So I definitely come from that conventional Western model of medicine. And if you think about that for a second, it's very much a pathology-driven viewpoint. So we are taught all about disease and pathology and how to fix it. So I've now sort of embraced a kind of a different perspective and coming from more of a sustaining that sort of health span, lifespan. And I think gut health for me is sort of central to that piece. I don't know if I planned on making that journey, but it's just one of those things that's evolved over time. And I think now there's really quite a lot of interest in that sort of holistic functional medicine space where you really are looking at individuals as a whole and you're trying to look at them from a multi-systems perspective rather than just waiting for the system, the organ to be broken and then trying to fix it in a sort of a retrograde kind of action. And I think now it's that idea of looking at the way modern medicine is designed so much in that sort of silo kind of perspective that you have specialties and you absolutely need that specialist knowledge. You need the specialist practice experience over decades to be able to deliver an evidence-based driven medical model, which is exactly what it is. But I think now there's an opportunity to use different kind of approaches. And I suppose for me and my journey, I've sort of come to it. I've lived in different parts of the world, gone through having children, and I think your perspective sometimes changes. So I've been able to incorporate a little bit of that traditional medical background and then apply it to setting up a business in the gut health space with my co-founder, Victoria McKellar, and kind of taking it from there.
Yeah. And I think, in the gut health space, right, there's a lot of terms that I think need to be the foundational understanding of what gut health is. Terms like what actually is the gut, what organs and systems are involved, and what is the gut-brain axis, and what's the difference between prebiotic, probiotic, postbiotic. Can you give us a little bit of a primer in gut health?
Yeah, okay. So gut health is a bit of a generalistic term. There's no really good definition, I don't think, that defines it. If you think about when I did medicine, gut health wasn't a term, and even the microbiome, microbiota stuff wasn't actually talked about. We used to sort of tell patients, there is gut flora. That was the word that we used back then. There was an awareness that there were microbes in the large colon, but that was really the limit. And because of developments in gene sequencing and the technologies that have moved forward, the gut microbiota space has really kind of exploded onto the mainstream really over the last, I'd say, sort of 2 decades. So in terms of when people talk about gut health, what they're really referring to is this a complex kind of microbiota. So that is just a collection of all the bacteria, the fungi, and yeasts and viruses that basically inhabit you. They live on you, inside you. We talk about the microbiota is the name given to the actual bacteria and fungi, whereas the microbiome is the genetic material that sits there. So if you think about, I think people find this a little bit confronting when they start to imagine that they have all these microbes living on them and in them, but it's a co-evolved system. It's an evolutionary evolved system over millennia. And if you think about human existence has always coexisted with microbes, and they're absolutely essential for a lot of processes that's part of nutrition and digestion, but goes beyond that as well. So if we take a step back and think about the size of it, so you're talking about microbes of sort of 100 trillion organisms. If you put it together, it's about a kilo in weight. We predominantly talk about the microbiota that inhabits the gastrointestinal tract, GI tract, because that's really the most studied at the moment. But there are microbiota that inhabit your ears, your lungs, the genitourinary tract. So there's other areas of research looking at what those microbes are doing in those other places. If we talk about gut health, we predominantly focus on the GI tract, which everyone knows goes mouth to anus. But most of the volume of those microbes inhabits the large colon. So that's the end part of the GI tract. And that's really because it's more easily studied. So the microbes that inhabit the small intestine are really the workhorse, is where the digestion and the absorption of nutrients is happening. But it is much easier to study the microbes in the large bowel, because that's really where you get stool samples. That is showing you which microbes are growing in your large bowel, so to speak. In terms of the space where we are, so that's really the microbiome, where it is, what it's doing. Gut health is really around the concept of how that GI tract is functioning, what sort of state of health it's in. And if you think about what those microbes are doing, because the question is really, why are we talking about it? Why is it important? And essentially they are part of your digestion system of absorbing nutrients. They synthesize vitamins that you need. They produce important metabolites, which we can expand on later, but some of these metabolites are called short-chain fatty acids. They're crucial to the health of the large bowel. They actually are molecules that feed the cells that line your large bowel. And the microbes also have enzymes which actually activate enzymes. So a good example of that is estrogen becomes activated at the level of the gut wall as well. They synthesize precursors to neurotransmitters. So I think once all these points had been sort of elucidated from some research, people started talking about the health of the gut and then its impacts beyond the gut system itself. So it's gone beyond just the symptoms of, say, an irritable bowel syndrome or IBS type symptoms, to sort of look at what sort of impact is happening at the level of the brain and other systems.
And would you say that is the sort of the gut-brain axis that everyone talks about?
Yeah, so a lot of people say gut-brain axis or brain-gut axis. No one quite knows which one's more important than the other. The brain influences the gut. Everyone's had a personal experience of that, getting nerves or butterflies, needing to go to the toilet more often. That's just that anxious energy transmitting into the gut wall. So the brain can control gut transit time, it can control mucus production, and this is all not under your conscious control. signal. So we call that through the autonomic nervous system. The vagus nerve is the nerve that innervates into the gut lining wall. The gut then translates information back up to the brain through neurotransmitters and chemicals that signal all sorts of feelings, so feelings of satiety. And so you have this incredible sort of two-way bilateral communication system. And if you think really about the terminology around irritable bowel syndrome. So a lot of people think about gut health and they think, oh, mate, I think that's just the IBS and maybe bloating. So IBS type symptoms or irritable bowel syndrome symptoms can be gas, bloating, pain, constipation, diarrhea, or any kind of combination of those systems. And it used to be very much a bit of a catch-all bucket. So people would traditionally go to their local doctor, be referred on to a gastroenterologist, and it's important that real pathological diagnoses were excluded. So things like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, which are diagnosed by specialists and have a criteria set for diagnosis. So if you have symptoms and you've excluded any red flag indicators of pathology, then sometimes you were put into this bucket of an IBS, and it was a little bit of a a functional bowel disorder, so to speak, because wasn't an identified cause for some of those symptoms. But I think now there's more attention on IBS as a brain-gut disturbance or a gut-brain disturbance rather than just a catch-all bucket for all the things that couldn't be put into another diagnostic space.
So would you say then that people who have, let's say, issues with their, I guess, mind or feelings or sort of personality type disorders, that it could potentially be something that's caused through the gut?
Yeah, and there's definitely research to demonstrate associative change, like connection. So we have to be very careful around cause and effect. So these aren't necessarily causal relationships, but they are definitely associated. So I think that's where you start reading a lot of the literature between autism and gut disturbance. Mm-hmm. You have a sort of a what would you call it, like a predisposition, say in a Parkinson's diagnosis, that you have a constipation type picture. And so there's an association there with the bowel being affected. So I think people are now looking at some of these brain conditions or psychological diagnosis and how the gut is interconnected to them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, understanding that we don't know the directionality.
Correct.
And again, we can't establish causation.
Yes.
That being said, I think that, within the circle that we run in, right, with nutrition and wellness people, there's still this okay, it doesn't matter what the directionality is. I want to optimize both ends, right? So I want to be really strong mentally and also really strong physically.
Correct.
So then obviously the next step is to turn to supplementation, right? So then, okay, how do I maximize my gut health? I'm going to take prebiotics. I'm going to take probiotics. I'm going to take postbiotics. Symbiotics.
Yep.
Hey, Amanda, do you know of a really easy way to give your kids some good gut bacteria?
I do indeed. I'm giving my family Akesi Wellness Elderberry Boost. They come in these little sachets. You just rip them open, pour it right in your mouth.
That sounds like fun. And I bet I could add that to their smoothies and some Greek yogurt too.
And what I love about Akesi is that you can take it any time of day, and there's a product for all ages, even my 12-week-old little guy.
Akesi believe that food is medicine, so the products are clean and have no gums and fillers. They also take a science-forward approach and include pre, post, probiotics, as well as polyphenols.
And the best thing is, you can get 15% off full-price items with free delivery when you use code Forties at checkout for any purchases in Singapore from their website, akesiwellness.com.
And don't forget to check out their new Akesi Berry and Akesi Tropical flavors too. Now back to the chat.
What's your take on what's really necessary to maximize gut health? Or is there even such is there something that we can do in that end?
Definitely. So I think even if you're maximizing your gut health, you're actually also maximizing your brain health.
And
they go hand
Two
in
for
hand.
one.
Yeah. So in terms of gut health, it's really about diet. Diet is the single most powerful force you can use. We've all inherited our genes, which we can't do anything about. So the human genome you're fixed with, your microbial genome pattern can change, and that changes with what you eat. So the first thing you can do is look at your diet, and it's really about plants and fiber. Microbes feed off fiber. And essentially, it's like looking at your diet and working out, how do I maximize plants in my diet? It really needs to be 3/4 of your plate. It needs to be varied and diverse. It needs to be colourful. You can make it fun. And obviously, the fermented foods are key. If you can make your own fermented foods, that's ideal. If you can do your own fermented drinks, any of your kombucha, kefirs, they can be milk-based or water-based kefirs. There's a lot of foods in that food group. If you don't have time and we're all rushed, then you look to supplements. So we've created supplements for busy families. And in the ideal world, people can ferment themselves. They don't have the time and they don't necessarily have the know-how, even though it's a relatively straightforward process. I make some great sauerkraut at home. My kids tell me it smells and they won't eat it. So they possibly benefit more from having a supplement. I've made great water kefir that's exploded on the roof. You've got to get it right. You need to know what you're doing. So in terms of maximising gut health, you can use, as you said, prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics. We've created some products that include all three.
Okay.
So if we go to basics, prebiotics are essentially the food that microbes eat. There are definitions, a sort of a substrate that's selectively utilised by host microorganism and confers a health benefit on the host. That's the classic definition. But for most lay people, prebiotics are essentially a food for your gut bugs. And that includes a subset of prebiotic fibres. They're essentially what the chemical name are oligosaccharides. Mm-hmm. That's a medium to long chain sugar molecule, essentially. You can supplement with those, and ones that you may see on the side of a container are fructooligosaccharide or FOS, galactooligosaccharide or GOS, inulin is another one. You can also get prebiotic fibres from your food, so anything from garlic, chicory root, artichoke, you've got the lovely green banana starch. So there are lots of examples of prebiotic fibre in your diet. Probiotics you can get from supplementation, but you're also getting live bacterial species if you're ingesting fermented foods. If you think about how to choose probiotics, essentially you can use a really simple classification. So group 1 generally have the common species that you'll have seen. So lacto species and bifido species. So they're both bacteria, and that you can get a combination of those. The second group normally includes a beneficial yeast, and the most common one for that is the Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And the third group are what we call soil-based probiotics or spore formers. An example of that is a Bacillus coagulans. You might see that in a kombucha style drink. So that's a broad classification of probiotics. In terms of a postbiotic, it's a really new area. Mm-hmm. So postbiotics can include either the probiotic that's been inactivated, or it can include the bacterial species and the metabolites that it makes, or it can include the probiotic and its little, let's say, cell components or cell wall or protein molecules that are associated with it. So it's a little bit of a bucketing group, but it's a new area, and I think it's really sort of showing where we're kind of heading in terms of the space. The other thing that's worth thinking about are what we call polyphenols. So polyphenols is essentially plant-based nutrients. So they are described, there's a complex group of them. There's sort of something in the order of 5,000-6,000. If you think about that beautiful variety of like colourful fruit and vegetables in front of you, all the plants essentially make these polyphenol chemicals as a form of defense. So a plant makes those in response to UV light, is in response to drought, in response to its own pathogens. We then ingest those chemicals. They are extensively metabolized by your gut microbes. So polyphenols, by their definition, I know there's a lot of words, are acting as a prebiotic. They're feeding your gut microbes. So the more varied and the more colourful plants that you can include are packed with these important polyphenol molecules. And I think if you think about them, you have to actually eat fruit and veggies, it 3 meals a day each day, because a lot of these plant chemicals, they're broken down extensively, metabolized and used. So you can't sort of store them up, so to speak, which lends itself to that, eat your 5 fruit and vegetables a day. It's moved much further on to, see if you can get your 30 different plant points a week or 30 different plants. But essentially it's packed with these polyphenols. People might have heard the word sort of antioxidants, and really that's what people thought. These plant chemicals had powerful antioxidants in them. There's also other examples of them, like all those great anthocyanins that are in all the red berry group. You've got curcumin that sits in the turmeric family. So people have heard
I love
of
a bit
these,
of turmeric in my cooking.
That's right, yeah. So people have heard of these fabulous plant inputs, but that's really what they are. And we've sort of worked hard to include a lot of those plant ingredients in our fermented drinks so that we're covering both the probiotic part of it, but we're also including those important prebiotic inputs and polyphenols to feed your gut microbes.
Yeah. And what you mentioned about eating the rainbow, right? I know that, one of the gut health conclusions that I've come to, and we're going to talk about the Hack Your Health documentary a bit later, but one of the conclusions they came to as well was that, there was so much early focus on how many, what was the amount of probiotic in your supplement, right? Like how many billion CFU. But now it's like, what is the diversity of the bacteria in your gut, right? And I think, eating the rainbow speaks to that, right? It's not about how many cups of broccoli can you have, let's say, versus
or having
how many
broccoli every single day
and every single meal, and that's the one vegetable I eat, right? Yeah. It's more about what does the diversity look like in your gut.
Hey Amanda, picture this. You're in your 40s.
I am.
You're working, you're raising kids, you're breastfeeding, and you're hungry.
That sounds about right.
But you're not going to feed yourself and your family any old crap.
No, that's actually why we use the Meat Club. The Meat Club is the premier source for top quality Australia and New Zealand produce right here in Singapore.
And if you're tired of the endless struggle of meal planning, guess what? The Meat Club subscription service delivers top quality meat direct to your door.
And we have a little treat for our listeners. As a new customer, you can get $12 off with the discount code TFF12 with no minimum spend. Discounts are only valid, though, through the website, themeatclub.com.sg.
And for more updates, recipes, and special offers, don't forget to follow the Meat Club on Instagram at themeatclubsg. Now back to the chat.
And to that end, how can we determine whether a probiotic supplement is a good one, right?
Yeah.
Is it the number of CFU? Is it the strain is patented? Is it, how do we vet our probiotics?
So good advice to start with is if you want to move away from what we call the arms race of the CFU.
like that.
You can look up any probiotic supplement. Ideally, you want a minimum CFU of 1 billion. And you'll see anything from 1 billion right up to sort of 800 billion. It can vary. But the most important thing is the diversity of species in there. And if you look at the back of any supplement, it'll tell you which species, and you can sometimes get inputs of the individual species. You can get strain level information. I can speak to our probiotics. We include like an overage. That just means we put more probiotics in it to ensure that that CFU is still at that level at the end of shelf life. So we call that overage, where you input more into it. There's different varies of refrigeration and shelf stable that they're not necessarily. A lot of people want to go for fridge, but you can have shelf stable as well. But I think the key thing is diversity of species. And really to think about those groupings, as I said. If you want to try probiotics, it's great to also rotate them, is another thing I would say, because you're actually introducing different species as well. And if you think about it in those three classes, so trial a lactobifido combination, and maybe if that doesn't work for you, look for one that has that Saccharomyces, that beneficial yeast. I know as soon as you say yeast, everyone kind of freaks out and thinks of like, I don't know,
thrush.
sort of like
thrush,
candida. But this is a beneficial yeast, and then try the third group, which is that spore forming. So you can sort of trial them in that sequence is another way of doing it. And most advice would be, you can be a responder and a non-responder. So try a probiotic for 3 months and then decide yourself, did I get improvement in what's important to me in my metrics? Am I treating an IBS type picture? Would I like to go on prebiotics to really just maximize my gut health? Am I considering doing some gut health testing? So it really is individualized, I think, to why you're taking it and how it fits into your life, and whether you enjoy it. So I think the other thing with liquid probiotics is they're meant to be fun and they're meant to really replace a less healthy option. So if you think of a busy household, you're really trying to have an alternative to, say, a juice, a soda, a sugary milk. So you're trying to introduce something that is also enjoyable to drink. And that's a unique space. And that's where I think we're really happy to be in that space.
Talking about sort of diversity of species, I have recently read about Akkermansia and its link with possible obesity and whether, people who don't have enough of this type of species in their gut microbiome are more prone to having obesity or metabolic disorder. Is there anything relevant or real in that?
Akkermansia is definitely the next poster child probiotic coming on. And yes, and that research is, again, it's got some associative links to it. I think in terms of Akkermansia, you can actually feed your resident amount of Akkermansia by using elagitannins, which are actually polyphenols, but pomegranate has been touted as a great input for feeding that Akkermansia.
I need to get some more pomegranate in.
Yes. And also that the stuff around obesity also looks at some of those ratios of different phyla of bacterium. So you've got different sort of patterns that you can look at from a gut health testing. Akkermansia is also it's definitely kind of progressing, and it's quite an expensive probiotic also to work with at the moment.
I've just bought some and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe it.
It has fastidious kind of growing requirements, which makes it kind of quite an expensive and difficult probiotic to grow and to keep stable. But that space is really evolving, and I think that is definitely worth watching.
Now, you mentioned earlier about, having products that are accessible to families, right, that fit easily into family routines and making sure that you can provide gut health supplementation that's accessible. Now, I am a mom of littles, okay? My little ones are 4, 2, and brand new, right? And I love the idea of giving them probiotics, but I'm wondering why, right? What would be my motivation? And is it immune system? Is it gut health? It's one of these things where when other moms ask me about it, I was like, I'm not actually quite sure why I give them probiotics. Can you help me?
So I think if you go back to the journey, and if I had my time again with my kids, I would love to change a few things. So if you think about the microbiome in utero, so ideally for a woman, you really need to be optimized in terms of your microbiome pre-conception, not dissimilar to really being optimized before pre-pregnancy. And everyone's au fait now with, folate to prevent neural tube defects. So I think women are very cognizant of the fact that they need to really consider their nutrition and nutrient status pre-conception. Essentially, at the moment, the understanding is that in utero that it's a sterile space. I would challenge that. At the moment, it's very difficult to consider an amniocentesis to look at, the microbiome of an unborn is just not really feasible. So at the moment, the working hypothesis is essentially a sterile environment, but bub inherits essentially the blueprint of that microbiome from mum. So then we have the journey of pregnancy and the exposures of that. So that includes everything from antibiotics during pregnancy to environmental exposures. At birth, we have, a bifurcation. Is it a vaginal or is it a C-section? And I've had 4 C-section children, so I completely understand there are decisions for both and there are medical indications for both. But once you go down the C-section path, you don't have that natural vaginal delivery. You don't have that seeding experience. You generally, on C-sections in most places, are given antibiotics at anaesthetic induction. So you have these knock-on effects. And the first exposure are the surgical gloves of your obstetrician. So the pathway of that is altered from the moment. That's not to say we should all feel bad if we've had a cesarean child. It's just to be aware that the journey looks different. Then you've got the breastfeeding formula bifurcation pathway. So I was fortunate enough to be able to breastfeed my 4 children. They didn't start off ideally, but I felt as though that was a very good. And I feel if you can do either both is brilliant. A vaginal delivery and a breastfed child is ideal, but if you can do one or either is also amazing. So that first amount of colostrum and breast milk has, and I don't know if your listenership is aware of that, one of the really important ingredients in breast milk is those human milk oligosaccharides. There is specifically a subgroup of oligosaccharides, and they are essentially undigestible for that. That baby does not have the capacity to digest. They are essentially digested by the baby's microbes. And there's this incredible flourishing period where that feeds that microbiome picture and it flourishes on those human milk oligosaccharides. They're now synthetically made and included in a lot of formula. So then you have the process of that first 6 months of essentially that's in most countries it's milk fed, and then you have a weaning phase where you get the introduction of those incredible fibres and carbohydrates, which you get another flourishing and you get another change in that blueprint. So you have this incredible opportunity, I think, with young children in that 0 to 3 year period. It's an incredible opportunity to really bolster that gut microbiome picture, but it's also on a risk period as well, because every course of antibiotics, and my children all received antibiotics in that first 3 year period. They had everything from skin infections to ear infections. And each time you do that, you do either perturb or you cause an imbalance. It's not to say antibiotics absolutely have their place and they are life-saving. That's an important point to get across. But I think we're now in the phase of a lot of us discussing antibiotic resistance in the community and really just questioning that the judicious use of antibiotics. And if you can, you really want to avoid those prophylactic courses. So that's just a course that's given to you in the in-case scenario. And really to ask, is it necessary? Can I do something else? Can I do watchful waiting? And that's not to say when you have a sick baby that has a high temperature, you need to seek medical attention. So I certainly don't want anyone to misinterpret what I'm saying, but it is just in that broader context of having kids in that period, it is a great opportunity, and it's also a risk period because that first 3 years is their founding time to establish a very strong, diverse microbiome. And I think it's just to think about the things that both impact it positively and negatively.
I had 2 C-sections, and I did give the boys, so I've got twins, which is why I had 2 C-sections. But I did give the boys the colostrum. I tried to breastfeed my first baby. It was very, very difficult, and then ended up moving on to formula. And now sometimes I feel like I kick myself, like, oh, I wish I'd tried harder, or, could I have done anything differently? And I wonder if I've screwed them up. Sorry, boys, if I have. But would then using probiotics in this situation sort of help aid their sort of microbiota?
Yeah.
And then is it also, how important is it then to get in the prebiotics, so the vegetables, the fibres, to ensure that obviously we're putting the microbes in there, and then are we helping them flourish by giving them that section, because obviously it's really difficult to get kids to eat their veggies.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's where probiotics have really come in. It's to supplement the fact that we have a really modern, fast-paced lifestyle. In the ideal world, yes, we should all have vaginal deliveries and breastfeed and live in a more rural setting that's exposed to the natural environment. But we can't, and realistically, we supplement to offset all those exposures and toxins that we're exposed to. We can't, we need to just try and maximize the system. And probiotics have their place. There's really good evidence for them in infant constipation and colic. They're actually part of certain medical protocols for premature babies to avoid a medical condition that's called necrotizing enterocolitis, or NEC. And some hospitals include a probiotic protocol for that specifically, because you've got a preemie baby born with an immature GI tract, and it just cannot tolerate formula or breast at an earlier stage than when it should. Other things that are in the older category, though, are traveller's diarrhea, antibiotic-associated diarrhea, and we'll get on to sort of that C. diff picture maybe in a little while. But so I think there's really good evidence that in those early years, you do look to supplement with probiotics to really enhance digestion, but also to support that immune system, because that 3-year development of microbiome is really where that young immune system is learning. It's designating friend from foe. Those microbes are teaching the immune system how to react to either pathogens or friendly kind of inputs, because essentially it lines the gut wall and it's the first exposure to the outside environment, to the body.
Yeah.
What about when a kid has had antibiotics for whatever reason they needed to have the antibiotics? Can they take probiotics with the antibiotics? Should they wait until after the antibiotics course is finished? When it would be the optimal time to start to rebuild that gut microbiome?
Yeah, and there's differing research on that. There's both. So most people would argue that you could take probiotics at the same time, but just space it from the antibiotic dose. Some antibiotics give you quite bad GI side effects. So anyone who's been on a flagyl or metronidazole course will know you get quite bad nausea and diarrhea. So sometimes you can use probiotics to increase the tolerance to the antibiotic course. The most important thing about antibiotics is to actually finish the course. Partial use of courses is really part of this picture of emerging antibiotic resistance. So just if you commit fully, finish the course, use probiotics, offset them 4 to 5 hours outside the other dosing and continue them on afterward, after you finish the course.
Yeah, that's exactly what my husband says, is if you're going to go for antibiotics, just finish it.
Yeah.
And if you're going for antibiotics just to shorten kind of the duration of your symptoms, it's not worth it.
No.
It's not worth it. Just go for it to the end. Well, speaking of going for it to the end, right, this new Netflix documentary is kind of all the hot rage, and it's called Hack Your Health. It's all about the gut, right? And it's kind of cutesy, to be honest. You have seen it, yeah?
I have seen it, and I love the people they interviewed.
Julia Enders.
She is very cool.
Love her. She's very cute as well.
My kids saw it. They loved it too.
Yeah.
Eating a carrot and an apple while they were watching it.
Yeah. Like, get me that fiber.
Yeah.
But, they kind of bring, obviously for them, they're looking at everything through the lens of gut, right? So gut health is the root of chronic illness. Gut health is the root of skin disease. Gut health is related to infertility, right? I mean, they go for everything. Do you believe that it's that fundamental and that far-reaching? Are we ready to make those statements yet? And if not, what's your takeaways from that documentary?
I love the documentary. I think it's a great way to really introduce gut health, particularly if you're at the start of your journey. I think they interviewed fabulous people in the space, particularly people like Rob Knight, John Cryan. They know this space. In terms of the links, I think a lot of the research links are still really associative. I run a gut health company, so I would love to say it actually impacts absolutely everything. I think that's still coming. I would argue there's absolutely really good evidence for gut-brain health, and there's great gut-skin health. I can't speak to some of the other topics. There's a huge amount of research. The base premise in medicine is do no harm. So most clinicians who recommend probiotic usage would say they're relatively cost effective, they do no harm, and they're worth a trial. So if you take that premise, then I think it is worth supplementing and trying them. In terms of the doco, I loved how they included the little felting.
Yeah,
that's what my kids loved.
That's the draw.
Yeah,
Although the FMT side of it, so I think it was really good that they introduced fecal microbial transplants. I would hold that space more. That is very much in the clinical space still. So the indications at the moment for FMT is for C. diff in a hospital setting that's resistant. I don't think people should look at the documentary and think that doing FMT yourself at home is a good idea. It is not a good idea at all.
That was a breathtaking segment of that documentary.
That's the main issue. The main issue I have with that documentary, and I think FMT should be kept in the space where it currently is, which is under very strict clinical research. And the reason for that is that no one actually knows what the ideal microbiome is for you as an individual. So I think that space is still really being explored. And I think gastroenterologists in that space are still really heavily in the research side of it and are really looking at it specifically in the C. diff space. I might be wrong, but that's my understanding of FMT, and that's for the moment where it sits.
So what you're saying is, if I could get my hands on fecal samples of the Olympic athletes that I expect my children to be, I should not inject that into them in my kitchen at home.
Yeah,
okay,
listeners,
take that with a grain of salt.
My question is do you eat the shit, or is it a suppository? Because I was like,
they do both.
She encapsulated it, right? She encapsulated it. So technically ate it.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're being serious here.
But in the clinical, it's generally via colonoscopy.
Yeah, I think that would probably have more of a draw for me.
Yeah, if you're going to go down the pathway and if we've established the perfect one for you.
Yeah. Well, again, outside of eating poop, right? So outside of the very extreme methods here, I have so many friends, right, who think they're just going to pop open a kombucha, they're going to take a packet of probiotics, a sachet of this, and boom, instant magical gut health, right? But I'm getting the sense from you that there's a lot of work to be done food-wise before the supplementation even makes a difference. What are your non-negotiables for someone who's seeking better gut health?
Okay, well, I think I'd have to use the triumvirate. I mean, it's a sleep, diet, exercise. So for gut health, it's diet first and foremost, and it's highly malleable. Like, you can change your meals. And the thing with fibre is just ideally you need up like 30 grams of fibre a day. And that's hard if you're looking at the back of a packet. So instead of looking at backs of packet, which ideally you should be eating whole foods, is 3/4 of your plate needs to be plants, and they need to be different each time. So you can look at that straight up and look at diet. And as you increase fibre, you should actually increase it slowly, because if you go from eating your fast food kind of standard American sad diet or whatever, and then the next day you ingest 40 grams of fibre, your gut might be a little bit upset with you that you've gone from sort of zero to hero. So the food that you're eating is the most powerful choice you can make. There's this great quote by a physician in the 1970s. I think he was Irish, and he said something like, America is a constipated nation,
That's not the quote I thought you were going to pull, but I like it as an American.
Yeah, and he looked in the 70s, I think, at fibre intake, at parts of Africa and Uganda, and they have 7 times the amount of fibre that we're sort of currently ingesting. But they also have a genetic and lifestyle. They're eating a huge amount of starch and tubers, and that's their local geographical diet. But it's just to say that variation of fibre intake is huge. Exercise is great for your gut. A natural circadian rhythm. The gut actually does need a rest. And if you build in a 12-12, or if you want to do intermittent fasting, the time that you're fasting, your gut is regenerating. The mucus layer is regenerating itself. It does absolutely need that gut rest. And in terms of sleep, I don't need to. I think most people understand the impacts of sleep on any system you're talking about. So unless you're really nailing down those 3, everything else is really just the top part of it. You need to focus on those 3 things as core. And I think from a female perspective as well is gut health influences brain health. And if there's one thing to sort of get across is women are really good, I think, at understanding currently risks of breast cancer, but brain health and dementia risk it is substantial. And I think if you're eating to support your gut, you're actually supporting your brain as well.
When it comes to eating fibrous foods, does it matter how it's prepared? And I'll give you an example. So yesterday I made this dish called sag, which was full of loads of different greens. I chucked in some broccoli, some cabbage, some chisim, some spinach and ginger and onions and garlic. So basically a lot of stuff. But then I blended everything, and then I'm thinking, is this blending breaking down that fibre that should have been done in the gut, or will I still be able to get the fibre out of it? I mean, I don't know if I'm overthinking it or whatever.
Yeah, so I think the goal is get the fibre in. If you have a fussy child, then smoothies and blending is a really good way of doing that, if that's the only way. In the ideal world, you really want to slow down that level of absorption. And the issue with liquefying is that you're getting faster absorption higher up in the small intestine, and you're not having that mechanical digestion process that starts obviously with enzymes in the mouth and really ramps up with the stomach and then into the small intestine. So I would argue if that's the only way that your child, adolescent will eat vegetables, then do that. Ideally, we want them eating whole vegetables on their plate, visually being stimulated, having all that colour, and because the process starts really with vision. And it's actually more appealing. I find when you do smoothies and liquefy, it's not anywhere near as appealing. It's also that combination. You've got to really try and nail down that protein, carbohydrate, fat combo as well, because that's a really big determinant of the absorption rates as well. And fibre, you can talk a lot about fibre, and it sounds really boring, but it's really important from a gut health perspective. And we just aren't eating enough of it, because as soon as you're eating processed foods, high fat foods, you're actually not eating enough fibre in general. And it has a really filling component to it, which we often sort of don't think about. We all sort of think about protein and fat as filling us up, but the fibre component of your carbs is, and that's really that push to use whole grains and to not process them and use them as nature intended them, and use more of those ancient grains, ones that people can't pronounce, and like freekeh and quinoa and all these things. If you've got an older generation, they've never heard of them. They're like, what is this? Yeah.
Well, you've given us a ton of food for thought, no pun intended, for today. Womp womp. But I would love to know kind of a summary point of your Forties formula, right? So this you've already mentioned a few great things, right, between sleep and diet and all this. But if you were giving women kind of one summary piece of advice for how they can live better, think better, move better, feel better in their 40s, what would that look like for you?
Eat lots of fibre. Make sure it's diverse. Make sure you have as much diverse fibre as you have diverse friends. So make sure you have friends that have differing views to you, that support you but challenge you at the same time. And kind of use those in combination and really try and maximise that opportunity to support your gut health.
I love it. Eat the rainbow, befriend the rainbow.
Oh, yeah.
Great tips from Dr. Elizabeth Biggs today being on our program. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you both for having me.
Guys, you know how much we love coffee. And if you want to show us some love, you can get us one.
Just visit buymeacoffee.com/the40s formula. Cheers. Got a great review from user 124-903-9784 on episode 5 with Dr. Cheryl. Just listen to the one about burnout. I really think everything she talks about also applies to men. Really interesting. So far, loving all the podcasts and have shared with many friends.
Thanks for sharing our episodes. And definitely, this is not just for women. Men can take in exactly what we're saying and apply it to their life too.
Before we go, please remember to hit subscribe and take a moment to support the 40s formula by leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform.
Your reviews will help us to reach more people and allow us to continue to bring valuable content. It should only take a moment, and it's a free way for you to support the show.
You can also stay updated with the 40s formula by following us on Instagram at the 40s formula, all one word. We share behind-the-scenes insights, episode updates, and much more, so please be sure to hit that follow button.
We appreciate your time and support. Thank you for being part of this community, and we'll be back next week for more empowering conversations with inspiring guests.
Bye.
Bye.
So I do follow a little bit of Stephanie Estima.
Yeah, similar vibe.
Yeah.
But Gabrielle Lyon's like all tatted up and like
like
she's
me.
a little rougher. Yeah.
Do you know who she reminds me of? Who's that makeup lady? Do you know who I'm thinking of?
Tell me who.
Something Von something.
Oh, Kat Von D.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know. I feel like she's got a Kat Von D.
Definitely. She's the Kat Von D of medicine.
Yeah.
Oh, she sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, she's
and edgy.
That's exactly
she
it.
is exactly that.
Because she does not mince words.
Yeah. Okay.
She's basically like, if you're not strength training, you're trash. I don't disagree. Okay, I don't disagree.
I like it.
Yeah.
She's just putting her money where her mouth is.
Yeah, that's very much it. Yeah, and she can, much like Peter Attia. It's like she definitely has the credentials and research to back up. She doesn't speak outside her scope.
Yes,
and I love that.
Yes.
You know, she's like, I am the person you come to if you want to learn about muscle and protein.
Yeah.
And she doesn't really, she has guests that address other things, right?
Yeah, of course.
And she really hits on that just very clearly. And,
yeah.
you know, I love it. And
Yeah.
I love her.
Oh, that'll be good.